Welcome back to the Northern Sentinels podcast. I'm your host, Chris Ayotte. On this episode, I sit down with someone I had the honor to soldier with and who remains a friend and inspiration. Russ Vida was born into an Army family and eventually found his way into the same profession. He started in the militia with the field engineers and ended up in the Canadian Airborne Regiment. Once his time was done with the Airborne, he had a successful career in the Army, culminating as a Regimental Sergeant Major. Upon retirement, he moved his family to Vancouver Island and found ways to continue to serve. First as an adaptive snow sports instructor on Mount Washington, and then with the charity Shoulder to Shoulder. This charity takes ill and injured military and RCMP veterans and their spouses or caregivers and provides them with a mountain experience to introduce them to winter sports and give them a break from the daily grind. Ironically, Russ's time as an adaptive snow sports instructor will give him the opportunity to continue to enjoy his home ski hill of Mount Washington despite his recent diagnosis with ALS. We took a deep dive into the disease and the links to military service. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Russ Vida. Russ, welcome to the NSP. It's great to have you in the show. Since this is a virtual podcast, maybe you can just tell us where you're calling in from today.
So I'm in Comox on Vancouver Island. It's where I retired to after I left Edmonton.
Yeah, it's I did university out there. My wife did university out there, and we know a bunch of the same people who have also made that migration west for a lot of really good reasons. So I can imagine the mountains and the ocean and everything else was probably the big drawing card for you.
For sure. And, when I retired, my kids were still pretty young. So it took just longer to get them dressed in the winter to go outside than they could stay outside in Edmonton. So we decided that was enough of that and looked for somewhere that we could do all of those fun things all year round. And this happened to be the place.
That's I never heard it described that way. It's so spot on. We spent a year in Australia on when I was on a course, and the thing that struck me is how all of a sudden I had like 40% of the stuff that I had back home because I didn't need winter stuff. I had way less footwear because I was like in flip flops or bare feet all the time, and my life just all of a sudden got immeasurably simpler because I had less stuff and the swings were far less.
Yeah, for sure.
It's amazing. All right, why don't we kick off with family stuff? Maybe start with your mom's side. And where's your mom's family from? Where does she grow up? What's the sort of origins of that side of the family?
Yeah, so my mom's folks, sort of their background is English and, three generations of Canadian families there. My grandfather on her side, Russ Vida, grew up in Saskatchewan on a farm, and then decided to take up medicine. So had to move to the bigger cities, and he went to McGill. And after he finished at McGill, he moved back out to Alberta, and so he started practicing medicine in Edmonton. And then there was a big polio epidemic in the Edmonton area, or I guess all over the place at that time. And so he was really engaged in that whole iron lung technology and all of that stuff. And, then he went off to the war. He was a navigator on bombers.
Okay.
And the Sunderland flying boats.
Sunderland. Okay.
Yeah, they used them for dropping along the coast on, invading vessels and submarines and that kind of thing, as well as in the machine guns on them and stuff like that. So I think of this training in southern Alberta, Claresholm. Funny story. For a guy to survive the war, he lived through two crashes, accident
Yeah.
one shoot down. So,
Oh, really?
so when he was first training, I heard a whole bunch of navigators on the plane, and the pilot was from Southern Alberta, and so they decided that they would follow up on stories the pilot's mom and dad's ranch, and so they got a load of all of these these new guys on the plane.
Great idea.
And so they go flying over the ranch and do the buzz, and then don't have enough power to pull up and knocks the belly of the plane off of one of those rolling hills in Southern Alberta. So that was his first experience with the plane crash. And then they were doing some training in Scotland after they had deployed over to Europe. And they ran into another mountain, and he survived that. And then the third one was they got shot down over the English Channel. And you as a paratrooper will know that, when you're walking around and get ready to go out and do your stuff, sometimes you loosen your leg straps off so that it's a little easier to move around. Well, in those planes and the bombers and stuff, they moved around quite a bit. And so most of the folks just had, the shoulder straps done up and leg straps loose. And when they were shot down and he, basically jumped out of this crashing aircraft, he had forgotten to do up his leg straps. So first, them up. So what happens.
Oh.
Opening shot.
Yeah.
Anyway,
did he land in the water? Oh,
yeah.
God.
Yeah. He was in with quite an amount of pain from the leg strap squishing the family jewels. So
I imagine that post-war, was he ever interested in getting back in a plane again?
Interestingly enough, that's how my mom and dad met.
Okay.
Because when he came back and years later, he would fly the sport parachute club in Edmonton.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
So he flew a little Cessna, and all of the sport parachutists back then in the early '60s. My dad was sport parachutist, and so the two of them became friends. And my grandfather thought that he should introduce this young Army guy to his daughter.
I wonder, any idea what sport parachuting in the 60s looks like? I mean, it's so high speed now,
yeah.
But in the 60s, I don't know.
Yeah, the old T10s and, whatever, the very first round turkeys were steerable.
So your dad met your maternal grandfather at the Sport Parachute Club because he was posted with the Airborne Regiment in Edmonton. Is that what he was doing?
Yeah.
So what's your dad's sort of origin story? And we talked about this before, the last name Vida being, I don't think I know anybody other than you and your brother, the Vida family. But what's the origins of Vida?
So it's Hungarian and Spanish and Italian and whatever else. Whatever other country or language uses the word Vida for life.
Yeah.
But in our case, it's Hungarian. And so Dad, his family left Hungary in 1956 during the uprising with the Russian, takeover of the Hungarian government and whatnot. So they loaded up overnight and went over the mountains into Austria on a donkey and a cart with whatever they can get out of their house in very short notice. And then they transferred, and then came to Cape Town. And at that time, the immigrants from Hungary were being sort of deposited in different areas, and Winnipeg was the place that our family ended up. So but Lord was 16, I guess, at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did they decide on Canada, or that was just the open lane available to them?
There was a couple of different choices. And I think that it was just whatever came first that was available that they would jump on.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting, Russ, you say, again, like Winnipeg, Manitoba. There's been, I mean, you listen to a lot of the podcasts, a lot of European immigrants in that sort of post World War II time frame landed in Manitoba. It seems to be the dominant location where immigrants from that part of Europe ended up, at least in terms of the guests on the show. So I always find that fascinating, these kind of linkages to different parts of the world based on family.
Populate the farmland.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Although my relatives were not farmers.
Yeah, there is a common thread about going up, especially like sort of north of Winnipeg, and farming that land. And there's more than one sort of story about you go and farm for 2 years and then you can go do whatever you want. So yeah, okay. So the Vida family lands in Winnipeg, and your dad's, yeah, he's still, he's got a couple of years, but I mean, he's at the end of high school. Did he have any sense of what he wanted to do?
No, I mean, there's this Hungarian kid that gets dropped into Winnipeg, doesn't speak a word of English, speaks 4 or 5 other languages, but not English, Russian and Hungarian and French and German, but can't communicate to the kid across the street. So he took full on learning language, and I suppose you have to understand that coming from Hungary, or the old country as they call it, there was a different sense of how families ran. And my grandfather was my great grandfather. Sorry, let me move that. My father was real authoritarian in the household, and his word was law, and everybody under his sort of reign was thwarted.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think as soon as my dad realized that the Canadian way was a little different, he wanted to get out from underneath of that oppression or whatever, and make his own way. So he learned English very quickly, and then decided that, adventure is awaiting me in the Canadian Armed Forces. So he joined up.
And how did it work back then? I mean, so he ended up in the Airborne Regiment, but what was did he go into an infantry regiment and then flow into the Airborne Regiment? Is that how it worked back then as well?
For sure.
Okay.
He joined up as a patricia.
Okay.
And then, spent some time in the different battalions, went over to Germany, spent some time in Germany. And then when he came back to Germany, off to the Canadian Airborne Regiment in Edmonton. And that would have been 67 or 68.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, and you were saying that your grandfather Taylor introduced your mom and your dad. So how did that happen? Other than, hey, this young guy I think is a good dude.
Yeah, well, I think they had, my dad and Grandpa Taylor had real close sport sort of enthusiasm and oh, you're gonna have to edit that. Right?
Oh yeah.
they had some common sports ideas. So parachuting, wanted to fly, all of those types of things. And so I think he invited them over for supper one night, and that's it on from there.
And what was your mom doing at the time?
Well, I think she was either just finished high school or had just started university.
Okay. And what was your mom's did she have a career path in mind? Or what was she planning on doing before she met your dad?
She was going to become a teacher and did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they meet. At what point does the family start having kids, and does your dad get posted, or you become based?
So posted to Germany, and that's where my older brother and sister and twins, Sandy and Dusty, they were born, as well as I. And then after that posting, we came back from Germany in 1966 or 67. And that would have been the time that he would have went to the Airborne Regiment.
Okay. So do you remember much of Germany as a kid? Okay. So Edmonton was more of your formative years.
Yeah.
So what did you spend your time doing as a kid in Edmonton?
All of the normal stuff. Whatever we were doing at school, sports and that kind of thing. Bumper riding the bus from our bus stop to school.
Bumper riding. Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Yeah. And then my mom and dad got divorced, I guess, when I was 6. And so we, there was a separation of the family, but dad was still in Edmonton, and we lived in St. Albert, so it wasn't far away. And then a little later on, my mom took a exchange position as a teacher in Australia. So we moved to Australia for a couple of years, northern Queensland.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that was cool.
Like how far north in Queensland?
Cairns.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So sort of the last bit before it really gets quite toothy, literally and figuratively. Yeah.
Well, and back then, Cairns wasn't a huge place. It wasn't the tourist sort of mecca that it is now.
Yeah.
The Gold Coast wasn't as opened up as it is today.
Yeah.
But we had super good friends there and did all of the things that you would imagine young Australian kids would be doing. In the ocean, doing stuff and catching, mangrove crabs, and fishing with the folks that lived right behind us were an Aboriginal family, and the father, he would take his boys out fishing, and my brother and I would go fishing with them. And
awesome.
Taught us all the ways to catch crabs out of the mangroves. You take a long piece of rebar and you put a little hook off the end and you shove it down their hole and you tap them on the shell until we grab on and just pull them out.
Yeah.
And if you needed to catch a snake that was in your woodshed, you took your jean jacket and wrapped it around your hand and you poked it in his face until he bit it, and then you grabbed it behind the back of the head. So those things. Things that you don't tell your mom about.
I don't think that the Australians advertise that on any safety posters for snakes now. That's not a government endorsed practice.
But it seemed to work, though. Anyway.
What age did you leave Australia?
I guess it would have been 11.
Okay. Where'd you go back to?
Okay, back to Edmonton, and then my mom got a teaching job in a place called Entwistle, Alberta. So 60 miles west of Edmonton. So in between Edson and Edmonton.
On the highway?
On the highway to Jumper.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Then we just stayed there until we were done school. It was a small, maybe 600 person town.
Yeah.
Farming community.
I mean, I'm going to ask you about, if you had any sort of, your eye was on anything as high school was coming to an end. But I also kind of realized that, you were in Edmonton off and on for years. And then before you moved to the island with your family, when you left the military, you've seen Edmonton change. So when you were a kid, like what was it like then as opposed to when you finally left and went to the island?
You know what? Because we went to Australia, I don't really recall going into Edmonton that much because we lived in St. Albert. So we had school in St. Albert. And, because my obviously, a single parent, my mom, we didn't really travel out of that range too much of sort of St. Albert. So I remember when we got back, my grandfather on my mom's side, my mom's dad had a farm halfway between Spruce Grove and Edmonton.
Okay.
Hobby farm, because he was a doctor and he just wanted to putter. But I remember it took about, 15 or 20 minutes to drive out of town from St. Albert to his farm.
Right.
When I was down at school, the city was literally on its fence line.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was quite a change.
Well, as you're saying, the separation between St. Albert and Edmonton, and it's indistinguishable now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really. So, yeah, it's I spent a few years as a kid in Cold Lake when my dad was posted there, and it was interesting going back when I was posted to Edmonton. I actually found the city, it had a similar feel to it. Like I felt like the DNA of Edmonton hadn't really changed all that much. But I don't know if that was just because I could remember some of the physical aspects of some of the landmarks still remain the same, or what it was. But I feel like Edmonton has this enduring character that hasn't changed over the years, and I don't know if that's because of the oil industry or just the way the people are in Edmonton. But it seems pretty steadfast to me. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the end of high school is looming. Do you have your sights set on anything in particular?
Yeah, well, you diagnosed, I had dyslexia, and it was bad. And so for me, high school was not a great place to be. I think my grade 10 math teacher said, you just need to stay away from math and don't participate in that anymore, because you're just real good at it. And lots of problems in chemistry and physics and all of those things that you had, sort of those base level courses in high school. It doesn't work. Diagnosed with dyslexia, and I didn't know what it was that I wasn't doing to keep me up with all of my peers. I became very frustrated, and finally I just said enough and quit school at the end of grade 10. I went off working in for jobs and working on construction jobs and driving heavy equipment and that kind of thing, and then got into the oil field and ended up in the Arctic offshore drilling rig stuff and a bunch of pipe inspection things and just different stuff to that a guy with a grade 10 education could do. And then I started to think about joining the military, and went to the recruiting office, and they said, you're whatever, you're not really what we're looking for. And I was like, oh, okay. So
Sure.
Yeah, I said, if you decide to go back to school and get some education, then maybe we'll take a look at it. And so, because the oil field was sort of cyclical, and winter, summer, different times where different jobs were available or whatever, I decided that maybe I should take some time and go back and get my grade 12. So there's a college in Edmonton called Concordia College, and at the time they were running was sort of a GED program, but It wasn't just where you do the test and then you've got your general education diploma. It was a full-on year where you did all of grade 11 and all of grade 12 in 1 year.
Okay.
You had to take 2 sciences and math, and all of the English and social, but they got rid of all of the things that really weren't academic, if you will.
Okay.
And so I went to Concordia and signed up to that program and just had a real slog of a year.
I bet.
Trying to figure out all of these things, and obviously my dyslexia was still there, and I didn't have any idea of why I was having all these problems. But when you have dyslexia and you don't know it, you figure out ways to work around the problems. And I started using the multiplication table to do division. Just using the table backwards, and because backwards made sense to me, that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
And in the end, I came up with some real solid ways of looking at problems from a dyslexic view that made sense to me. And so typically if I had the answer to something, I could work back from the answer to figure out, all of the steps. And so I would always look for something that has a solution and work through the problem and do it all out, fill it all out, like do all of the steps backwards. It seemed to work for me. So anyway, I went back and I did that year, and I think being a little more mature and having worked and seen, it took more than just grade 10 to survive in the world, and I didn't want to be just a laborer forever. So I cracked down and ended up, I think, with a 90% average through that year. It was brutal.
Oh yeah, that's a lot to jam into a year.
Yeah.
It's like as you're saying this, like my head's starting to hurt, and I'm going, oh yeah, that would not be fun at all.
Well, there was this guy at the recruiting office. He said, you basically he said to me, "You're not smart enough to be an Army guy."
Right.
The glove was dropped.
Yep. Poke the bear. Don't poke the bear.
Yeah.
So what was when you got into the Army, what were your initial impressions? Because I mean, your dad was in the Army. Was your brother in the Army by this point?
So it was a bit of a crooked path. At the time, the recruiting process was basically stopped for the Air Force, and there was no entry in the trades that I was interested in. And so I joined the reserves because a good friend of my dad, Major Boudelier, who you might know, Boots Boudelier.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was the CO of, he was the rank 4 CO of the Reserve Engineer Squadron or Regiment in Edmonton. 8th Field Engineer Regiment was called.
Right.
And he said to my dad, the best way for Russ to get into the right force is to join the reserves and then do a component transfer from the reserves to the right force.
Okay.
So I went and joined the reserves and did, worked, oil field stuff and got into the reserves and, participated in the regimental activities in Edmonton. And back then there was like some opportunity to go to a Red Force unit if there was a deployment, those kinds of things. And the other thing about 8th Field Engineer Regiment is CABC was in Edmonton at the time, the Canadian Airborne Center. And so as a reservist, I wanted to go and take my jump force, but it was impossible to get loaded as a reservist And so basically Boots said, just walk over there. He said on the first day,
I love it.
he says, just walk over to CAVC on the first day of the next jump serial and wait for the PT test. He said, there's always people that fail a PT test.
True story.
He said, just jump on, just do the PT test. And you know what? If somebody fails off the PT test that's got a course loading message and you've already done it and you passed, just stay on the course and I'll have the clerk do all the paperwork and send it over to CAVC and we'll sort it all out. So I was kind of like,
this guy's crazy.
Yeah, another Boots Foodalier adventure. So went over there and waited, got in line, and everybody sort of jumped on the chin-up bar and did their thing and sit-ups and did the run or whatever. And at the end, there was 3 guys that had filmed. And Billy Boland calls out my name and says,
these connections.
And he goes,
oh my God.
Hey, Private Vida, get over here. We don't have any paperwork for you. You're not on any lists, but you put your name on this paper and you've done the PT test and you passed everything. So we need to get some paperwork. And I said, oh, well, my CO said he'd have the clerk send it over to your clerk. And he said, okay. He said, you got 20 minutes. Get over to your unit, get them to sort it out, and then come back. So that was it.
Shout out Billy Boland. Right on.
And another funny thing, Billy Boland and his 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds, had jumped out of the mock tower because both of our dads were instructors at CAVC, and they used to take us in for the demonstration of the mock tower to the jump courses.
It's such a small world. So for listeners, Billy Boland is a bit of a legend in the Canadian Army PPCLI airborne community, and in fact, he was the infantry sergeant major in Afghanistan when I was over there, and he was a sergeant major to one of my good friends. So it's just things come full circle in life for sure.
Well, and Billy Boland Sr. and my dad were best friends.
Really?
Yeah. So that's
awesome.
It all comes around.
So now you're in the reserves. You're parachute qualified.
Yeah, finished that course, and I think I'd only been in the reserves maybe a couple of months, and I was pretty fit. And then says, "Hey, there's this ship's team divers course running in Esquimalt." Said, I think that we should just send you out there. You could just go on that course.
Worked last time.
I'm like, yeah, okay. Like, do I need any paperwork? He goes, I'll send you the paperwork this time. So some Chief Skullroot was a buddy of Boots Foodalier's. So when I showed up, he put my name on the list, and away I went and did the ship's team divers course and then came back to the unit. And so all within, I think maybe less than 6 months of joining the reserves, I was para-qualified and ship's team diver qualified. So, and then I was going to do some exercises with the combat divers and get a conversion from ship's team diver.
Right.
Combat diver. They used to do that back then. So that was the way I got into all of that. And then there was an all out for people to go to Cyprus with the Patricias. So I did a tour in Cyprus with them, which was interesting because most of the old guys were all, buddies of my dad's, right? So
this sounds like if you could write the ideal sort of first year or two in the Army. I mean, it's not everybody's experience, but certainly my sense is that, and I don't love the sort of, back in the day stories, but there certainly was more things to do that were, air quotes, fun, that had the adventure in it. With deeper funding comes those having a base overseas that you can get posted to, and having more ability to run these courses. So there's more volume that's going through, and these sort of things that are the adventure that really excite people were more common, I think, back then. Yeah, without a doubt. So, okay. At what point did the regular force come into the picture?
So I've participated in, the tour to Cyprus with the PPCLI, and then they were getting ready to do another tour in Croatia, and so I was asked if I wanted to go to Croatia with them, and I said, yeah, sure, of course, yeah, I'll do that. By then I was a master corporal, so I was a Section 2 IC in an infantry section. And when we returned from Croatia, they had said, listen, if you want to join the Reg Force, we'll take you as an infantry. And by then, I had already done my 6A reserve engineer training. And so a lot of stuff had been covered. And so I got a direct entry into the PPCLI because the engineer trade was still closed for entry.
Okay. What year was that?
94.
Okay. Yeah.
So joined the Patricias and then did another tour in Croatia. And then when I got back from that tour, there was a bunch of positions open in the Canadian Airborne Regiment. So, by that time, I was purely focused on getting into the engineers, and I had to figure out the path inside the military to do the remuster from within,
right?
Because they weren't bringing anybody from the outside. So I went to the Airborne Regiment, and at the time the Airborne Regiment had under its the engineer platoon. And so I was in 2 Commando and worked a lot with engineer platoon. And basically, so one day to somebody you're familiar with, Kenny Hodge, he was the platoon warrant, and Mark Flint was the platoon commander. And I said to them, I really like to switch over to combat engineers. I was one in the reserves, and I'd like to do that. And Ken was like, well, I'm really not sure how that would work. And just so happened at the time, my brother was the adjutant of the Airborne Regiment. And so he made a phone call to the engineer career manager. I can't remember who that was. And anyway, there was some discussion about how it was going to be tested. Was I capable of just moving straight across to the engineers? And so I had to write a test. And Ken Hodge was the invigilator for the test. They sat down, and I got the weight of a Blocker C4 wrong. And that was the only question I got on the test. And I still claim to the day that it's because they were saying it the weight with the wrapper on, and I was saying the weight with the wrapper off. So without having to change, one day was in and went over to Airborne Engineer Platoon because it was internal moves. The engineer platoon belonged to the Airborne Regiment, and everything happened under the umbrella.
Right on. So now you're across. You're into the engineers, still in the Airborne Regiment.
Yeah.
Now, if you look back on your career, how long did you spend between the reserve time and the Reg Force time?
The whole career?
Yeah.
27 years.
Yeah. So over 27 years, like if you look back on it, what do you look back on with the most sort of fondness, whether it be a job or the things you loved about soldiering? what are the things that stand out in your mind about the profession and your experience in it?
I think the most interesting thing was being able to take your position and turn it into something that you wanted it to be and bring people along with you. And it was like, if you had a group of folks that were like-minded, you could push and push and push, because the system was still a little open to, to internal change, if you will. And if you had all the people behind you, you could move them in and do stuff that really you couldn't do now, I guess, today. So it was about teaching younger folks how to do something, or mold their ideas and the way that they wanted to display themselves, and bring them along. It's leadership. I guess it's leadership, but it's leadership in a bunch of different ways, other than just over there, let's go. You know what I mean? Or blow the whistle and over the top. It was about molding ideas. And so I think nowadays we call it mentorship.
Right. Yeah, I've had this conversation with people before about at least from my experience, this sort of misconception that although the military is extremely hierarchical, it's actually not very rigid in a lot of ways, because of the dominance of the theme of leadership, the desire for people to work off intent and use initiative, and find creative ways to solve problems. And that's one of the things that I sort of realized that I like about the earlier part of my career is, although you're a lieutenant and you're very much in that structure, there was so much autonomy for creativity and expectation that you would take initiative and figure things out. It was wonderful. And as it progressed in my career, that got constrained significantly. So yeah, no, I absolutely, that resonates with me 100% about that ability to lead, to mentor, and to bring the team along with a vision and a direction you want to go.
We had an opportunity in 2 CER. At one point in time, the school didn't have the ability or maybe the manpower to run all of the 3s courses that they had to run for an influx of new combat engineers.
Yeah, the 3s course is a basic engineer course for soldiers.
Yeah, and so 2CR was tasked to run 2 troops of. I
remember that.
And so our squadron ended up with these 2 troops of young soldiers that wanted to be combat engineers, and running that course without there was oversight from the school in that, we had standards and we had, certain lessons that we had to teach and to a certain standard or whatever, but without being under the microscope of the school, if you will. We could do things that took those young soldiers way beyond what, most 3's courses did, because we had them, and as instructors, I was a sergeant, and I had Mike Thompson was a master corporal, and he was my 2IC, and we lived out of the back of an APC with our students. And that experience of just them seeing what day-to-day life was when they were done their course, they were like any other 3's qualified person in any other unit, because they'd lived in an APC and they'd cooked in the pressure cooker, and they'd done all of those things as part of their course, and most of it they learned by osmosis. And they were just so much more that they got from that course. And I mean, I like to think that the 60 odd folks that we trained that year were beyond what the school would produce. And not to say that the school didn't produce a good outcome. It was a different outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. What year was that? So did you, and the reason I ask is because I think we were both a benefactor of those graduates, because I think you came to 1CR. We both came to 1CR at the same time into 1-2 Field Squadron. And I think some of those troops ended up in the squadron and were very good. I mean, noticeably better.
It was like 97-ish, somewhere in there, 96, 97.
No, it must have been another cohort.
98, somewhere around there.
Yeah, because we had soldiers come into the squadron who had gone through a similar, so maybe they did it again, and there wasn't a definite difference about their level of comfort and confidence and already having roughed out some of those things because they had basically got their engineer skills, their basic engineer skills in a unit. Yeah, no, it's there's a real benefit to the to that model. There's no doubt at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, at what point, Russ, did you start to think about ending the engineer career, ending your time in the Army?
So, I guess I was I was living in St. Albert, and I was the Regimental Sergeant Major of 1CR, and I had some injuries that were nagging, and I needed to get them sorted out because they were going to be life changing and whatever. And so I would say that then, as a chief warrant officer, I suppose I could have not taken the annual PT test, and nobody would have known the difference but me. And so I realized that, and I realized that I wasn't going to ask young soldiers or officers that were in the unit with us to do things that I wasn't capable of doing or prepared to do, and mainly because of the back injury. So I decided that Jim Julian was the CO, and he was changing after my second year as RSM. And I had been going to see the MO, and he was basically saying, your back is done, you need to get out.
MO's medical officer, for those listening who don't know.
So he did all the paperwork, and basically it was a matter of whether I wanted to or not. I was medically released,
right?
Because of they didn't want the knock-on effects to me injuring myself worse than I already was. So I just decided, okay, I'm going to be medically released. I still really enjoy my job. I'm not grumpy. I'm not pissed off with the system.
Yeah.
I don't have any, deep concerns with how my career went. And I was still, I was still fit. I did the mountain man competition and whatever with Jim 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Second year I had to just slide in because shit, and the MO said I wasn't supposed to carry a rucksack, but
so I decided to do it for 30K, 50K.
So Jim, I said to Jim, I'll just come, because Jim was going to do it. And we had done it the year before, and we finished as a command team together, did the whole race together. And so I said to Jim, okay, well, I'll just come along with you, but I won't bring my rucksack. And he said, okay. And then when he came to pick me up in the morning, I had my rucksack, and he thought, hey, what do you do with that rucksack? So anyway, so we went off and did the thing. But so, my family was still young. If I would have stayed, and I probably could have, it would have been 2-year posting here, 2-year posting there. And I just didn't want happen for my kids. I wanted them to grow up in one spot and have lifelong.
So you already said you weren't grumpy. So how did you find the transition from, 3 decades in uniform to being a civilian and moving out to the island? How was that whole process for you?
It was, it may sound good, but it was, dust your hands off and move on. And my wife asked me, I don't know, like 3 months after I'd gotten out, she's like, don't you miss the Army? And I was like, no, not for 1 minute. I miss the people. I don't miss the job.
Mm-hmm.
I was done with it. It was, I had done the things that I wanted to do or could do. And I had to move on, find what's the next adventure.
So, and I want to dig a little bit into this because lots of conversations with people about transitions. So do you think, Russ, that that was your experience because of who you are as a person? Do you think it's that because you made the decision while you were still enjoying the career? Or did you do anything specifically, like set conditions so that when you did transition that you were satisfied? Like what did that look like for you?
So, to be clear, when I was medically released, I had significant back injury, and I was also diagnosed with PTSD. And that really bugged me because I didn't think I had PTSD. I thought I had PTS, like I was living with stress from some traumatic situations, but I didn't consider it to be, debilitated, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I could handle it, and I knew when I was in situations that I needed to extract myself from because the temperature starts rising or whatever, or if the anxiety gets up. But it wasn't something that was going to influence my day-to-day life. And so between the back injury and the PTSD, I was still enjoying my job. It just made sense that it was the right time to go. And how was I going to transition? There was no way I could go and not do something. I couldn't just go and be retired. And so I went to work for a metal, a welding company that builds heat exchangers in Edmonton. Huge company, Altex Industries, and their ownership group are just full of fantastic folks. And we'll go back to Altex later on in our discussion, I'm sure. Anyway, they wanted to do some efficiency management and have a look at where they could tighten a few things up. And, lots of oil field companies around that to fix problems, you throw money in it, hire more people, and that solves the problem. Well, not necessarily. And so Jim Julian and I had done a soldier for a day with the leadership from that company. And, and they, we brought them into the unit and they went down into the stores areas and looked at the cages for the section cages. And they were like, how do you get your troops to hang all the shovels up the exact same way in every cage, right? Throughout the whole building. I said, well, the more important point about that is if you look at the tip of the shovel, they're sharp. And they laughed. And then I think that they went away and thought about that and went, he's right. It's not about how the shovel was hung up. It's that it's serviceable for the next time. And that's an efficiency. You're going to be able to do your job better the next time. And so I went to work for them, and it was not meant to be a full-time job. It was, I'm going to go and take a look at a few of their processes. And I did that, and I worked for them for about 18 months. We tightened up a bunch of stuff that they needed to get sorted out. Did some leadership training, both to their middle management and their executives while I was there. And when that was done, we moved to the office.
So when you moved to the island, did you have a plan to work? Did you just want to focus on family? Like, what was the vision for that?
There was another company that asked me to do some work for them since similar projects, so we did that, and it didn't work out as as well as I had hoped it would. We did lots of good stuff in correcting some of the sort of pitfalls that they had in the go, and then it was just there was some personality clashes and whatever, and so I just decided that it was time for me to go and really retire.
Where did let's get into the volunteering thing a little bit here, because you're doing some very very cool volunteering, which is always another great way to serve. So what was the first sort of volunteering thing that you got into?
So when you step back to transition, when you get out, there's something missing that it's hard to put your finger on, or it was for me anyway. Mm-hmm. And even through the work with Altex and the company here on the island, at the end of the day, it just something wasn't complete, and I needed to figure out that piece. And when I had the time, I figured that it was service, and I wasn't giving back to something bigger than me. Working for a company is you do your job and you get paid, and it's all about you in the end, the paycheck. And I thought back to all of the things that we did on tours, in Bosnia and Croatia, and the folks that were all over in different tours in the Canadian military. And what did we always do? We always found a local job, fix a school, or build a bridge so that these kids could get across to the playground, or all of those things that we did on those tours. And that was about helping people versus helping a government. In your soldier duties, you were doing this governmental activity, but on our free time, if you will, we were fixing schools and helping kids and whatever. And so I realized that that's what was one of the things that was missing from my life. And so a friend of my mom's actually was a volunteer instructor at an adaptive snow sports organization, and I like to ski. And so he said, well, you should come up and learn how to be an adaptive snow sports instructor and see what that's all about. And I was like, well, what does that mean?
Right. So, yeah.
What is an adaptive snow sports instructor? And so I went out in Mount Washington there and took the course and absolutely fell in love with it. It was so fulfilling, and it was getting back to that service. Not necessarily for country this time, but for community.
So what comprises, what are the different elements of adaptive snow sports?
Yeah, so it's really cool. So we do stand-up ski, sit skiing, stand-up snowboard, and sit snowboard.
Okay.
I'm not a snowboarder, so I teach the skiing. Mm-hmm. And also we have like a snow slider where somebody that can stand but can't bear their weight, they can put their elbows in this snow slider, and it's got 2 skis as well. So they have their own skis on, and then these supports that are rigidly fixed.
Okay.
So adaptive snow sports covers sit ski, so physical injuries. It covers VI, so vision impaired, all the way through to blind. Cognitive impairment, so traumatic brain injury, or any of those elements that are on sort of the scale of autism, ADHD, and now it's a scale. It's not you have autism, you have this, you have that. So we learn how to deal with all of the issues that come with a lot of folks that have all of those different, whether it's ADHD or autism or Down syndrome or any of those types of cognitive issues. So a lot of problem solving. How do you deal with a deaf person? How do you deal with somebody that's nonverbal? What cues are you using?
Yeah, that's a lot.
A lot of autism, it's noise, or it's a group of people that they're uncomfortable being in, or whatever. And what I found was when we did the module for cognitive impairments, I realized how close a lot of those things were to folks that had PTSD.
Okay.
And how it would transfer. Like some kids don't like loud noises. Well, a lot of veterans that had traumatic experiences don't like when a gun gets shot or a car backfires or what. And so I could connect the dots. And PTSD wasn't part of the program. It wasn't in the training program, but I started to see the relevance of a lot of those things. And then, obviously the physical injuries, if a person is paralyzed and, or is an amputee, then he would need to be or he or she would need to be a 6-year. Okay, well, that can transfer over to injured veteran. And so I started to grow this idea of, we need to get more veterans into this type of activity, if they're interested in it. And fortunately for me, the club that I belong to, Vancouver Island Society for Adaptive Snow Sports, has lots of veterans as instructors because of the location.
I was going to ask you that if there's a lot of veterans volunteering, and I'm curious because I'm working with True Patriot Love Foundation on the Veteran Volunteerism Initiative, and one of the things, like the main thing that we're interested in, is the value of volunteerism as people transition out of the military to provide that sort of purpose and another way to serve.
Yeah.
So, in talking to some of those other veteran volunteers, do people share sort of similar experiences on how volunteering has been useful in their lives after service?
100%.
Yeah.
It's like, some people will say, I don't know how I got on without doing this. The value is not a monetary value. The value is a value to their health, because it's mental health and it's physical fitness and it's out in the environment, and for our organization anyway. And I was lucky that there was people in place in Vancouver Island Adaptive Snow Sports that were already thinking about looking after veterans because they were. And after Afghanistan first started, a few of the folks that had been there for a while came up with an idea to bring injured Afghan vets out and to Vancouver Island and do some skiing. And one of the fellows that you'll be closely to was one of the recipients of that program. And he came out, and participated. The volunteers did all fundraising, local fundraising, whatever, to bring out Paul Franklin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they put him on the mountain, and they paid for his, a lot of his expenses and whatever. And that was sort of the beginning of a program that then morphed into, when Soldier On heard about it. Soldier On partnered with our club, and then they would bring out 25 or 30 injured veterans every week for a week-long camp. And we did that camp for about 8 or 9 years.
How did Shoulder to Shoulder sort of come into the picture? Are these connected in some way?
Yeah. So
okay.
What happened is that another fellow that's a veteran, and the Adaptive Snow Sports and I were talking, and we were saying, he has significant PTSD and has some issues that he needs to look after in order to be a participating member in society. And he said to me, my wife is the reason that I'm able to get out and do things. And that led to future discussions over time. And we decided that we would start a program where injured veterans could bring their spouse or primary caregiver in order for them to have a shared experience.
Right.
Soldier On is a fantastic program that has lots of funding, and it takes that injured veteran and puts them in a camp for however long, some day camps, some week camps, and they're fishing, or they're out fly fishing for a week, or they're canoeing for a week, or they're out in the mountains on horseback for a week or whatever. And when the veteran comes home, they have this experience and they're all happy and whatever. And what we found was, through talking to some of them, was they almost didn't want to be able to, or didn't want to have to tell their spouse about what a good time they had.
Right.
They felt guilty.
Yeah.
Because the person that looks after them stayed home and looked after the house, the finances, the kids, whatever it was, while they were once again off on an adventure.
Mm.
And so,
yeah, once again, that's important. Yeah, once again, I'm back here and you're off on an adventure.
Yeah, and so it clicked with us that these folks that have traumatic injury, physical injuries, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes have associated PTSD or PTS. Still involved in that sort of circle of illness is the spouse or the primary caregiver that's dealing with that person that has those physical or mental health issues, has secondary PTSD. It's never recognized.
Yeah.
And so, and oftentimes even the people themselves don't recognize it. They're just so busy keeping, the ship on course, if you will, that they don't recognize that they need respite, or they need, mental health care or whatever. And so we thought that's how Shoulder to Shoulder came around. We thought, if we bring the injured veteran and their spouse or caregiver, and in the Shoulder to Shoulder program, I'll just as an aside, we leave caregiver definition wide open, because it can be anybody. It's a social support person for that veteran while he's with us for that program. So it could be a daughter, a grandson, a mother, a neighbor, whoever is going to be that social support person for the veteran during this few week or 3 or 4 days. And what we realized was those spouses needed that respite. They needed to have a shared experience where neither one of them was guilty at the end of it. And what we wanted to do was relieve them from having guilt about the expense. And so we fundraise, within our community, local businesses. We try to get government grants, and both provincial and federal. True Patriot Love has been absolutely amazing supporting us. They've given us grants for the last 2 years, and we're getting another grant again this year to help provide funding for those camps. And after the first year, we knew that it was something that had to carry on. The response from the participants was overwhelming. The only thing that we ask from the participants is that they provide us a paragraph of a testimonial at the end of the week.
Yeah.
both the veteran and the spouse.
Right.
And we had sort of unbeknownst to us more effect on the spouses and the caregivers than on the veterans after the first 10. And we were like, yeah, you know what? I think we hit the jackpot here.
Yeah.
Because we're able to take that spouse and say, you're welcome to come on the tent. You don't have to ski if you don't want to. If you want to sit in the hot tub and drink a glass of wine, it's your time off. And because we're paying for all of their accommodations and meals, we give them $1,000 travel grant to get to the mountain. We pay for all of their on-hill expenses, everything.
Yeah.
There's no guilt in there, so that they're not taking money away from their family to come out and have this adventure. The first I said to this one lady, she said, I'm just gonna read my book. I'm like, fair enough.
Right.
On the first day, we're going up the mountain. I was like, why don't you just come up to the top of the mountain? Because it's such a beautiful view.
Yeah.
From the top of Mount Washington, you look down over the Georgia Strait or the Sailor Sea, and it's absolutely amazing because everything at the bottom is green, and you're up in this beautiful winter wonder. And once we got her up there, it was like, well, we got to try some ski boots on, and we'll just take you for one run so you could say that you skied on Vancouver Island. And she skied for the whole week.
Awesome. Yeah.
So it was important to realize that we needed to include that spouse or caregiver and bring them along.
I just have a quick question about shoulder to shoulder. Now, I do some volunteering in veterans organizations, and one of the things that's clear is that there's a network of support that helps different veterans charities and not for profit. So it might be shoulder to shoulder, but there's other people who are contributing, whether it's the federal government or alike. And I'm just curious as to who helps support and sponsor shoulder to shoulder.
Shoulder to shoulder is truly one of those programs where we reach out to everybody and anybody that could provide us some sort of funding or sponsorship is welcome. But from the very beginning, True Patriot Love Foundation has been absolutely amazing. They've given us a grant over 3 years for each of the 3 separate years that they've been involved. Vieta and the meeting of True Patriot Love, amazing folks, and they're just so helpful with providing funding. The other organizations, really, Royal Canadian Legion, British Columbia Yukon Command, have been instrumental in getting the word out to the local legions to provide assistance. And Canada Command, I went out to Ottawa and spoke with the folks at Canada Command, and party fund money must be spent on veterans. It can't be spent on anything else. And so Canada Command had sent out some direction or information about True Patriot or about shoulder to shoulder to all of the different provincial commands. And that allowed us to tap into that Poppy Fund money. So all the local legions, when they have their Poppy Fund account, those local legions can now release money out of their Poppy Fund account for supporting us. And the Lower Mainland and the island, the legions have been absolutely amazing as well. One legion gave us $20,000 out of their Poppy Fund, the other one, $10,000, and lots of them we've asked for like a sponsorship of $5,000 brings one injured veteran and his spouse to a camp. That's about our budget number. And lots of local legions have basically sponsored a veteran and their spouse. So that's really good. And loads of local companies, Altex Industries in Edmonton sponsors a veteran and their spouse every year. Local car dealer, Ron McLean, car dealership here in Holox, as well as Richard Ferrier, real estate. And it just comes from lots of different places. And there's one other thing that a lot of veteran organizations may not know about. If you're looking for sponsorship, there's a program called the Veterans Family Wellbeing Fund at Veterans Affairs Canada. And every year that fund is supplied money from the federal government. And you can go there and ask for grants from Veterans Affairs Canada to deal with veteran and veteran family activities. And this year it's funded up to $6 million. So, go on Veterans Affairs Canada website and fill out the application. And if you meet the requirements of the program.
Now, we talked about adaptive skiing, and as we've talked about previous, you're in a situation where you're probably going to be needing adaptive skis in the future at some point. And I mean, I think this is the impetus to sort of one of the reasons to have the podcast was to be able to maybe bring some attention to an issue. So maybe I'll just hand it over to you, and you can give us a little bit of why that is going to be the case.
Sure. Ironically, with the adaptive skiing, I really took to learning how to, and then learn how to instruct sit skiing. It's absolutely amazing. It's such a freeing activity for somebody that has limited mobility. You get out on the mountain and you go where you want to go when you want to go there, and you're not limited because you're mobility or because you're an amputee. So it's absolutely amazing. And ironically, was diagnosed with ALS, and eventually, sooner than later, I'm going to end up, if I want to skiing in a sit ski. So having learned to sit skiing and then become a sit ski instructor, it's kind of ironic that that's the way it's going to end up for me. So the ALS diagnosis took a long time to figure out. It's really a diagnosis of elimination because they try to eliminate all of the things that it could be before they get to the testing, and the testing is quite significant. And one of the sort of symptoms lead you to a diagnosis of ALS right off the hop. So there's lots of different stuff going on, and every single person that has ALS progresses at a different rate. The illness progresses at a different rate, and their symptoms are all different. So it's difficult to look at a person that has ALS from the start point and say, oh, that guy has ALS.
Right.
So for me, the first thing that happened was I was getting these weird pains in my stomach, and they would move around. Like one day it would be lower left, and the next day it'd be upper right. And I went to the doctor and got some ultrasound and then an MRI, and there's nothing. And she was like, "That's right. I don't know. There's nothing. But we can't do anything for nothing."
Right.
Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, cool. We'll wait and see. Maybe whatever. We'll just see how it progresses. And then one day it just stopped. And I was like, feel a lot better. And cool, moving on. And then I was out skiing a couple of winters ago, and I went to pull my ski boot on, and I couldn't pull my boot on because I didn't have the strength in my toes to keep my toes pointed. So I had to pull my boot on and push my foot back. And I was like, whatever. And figured out a way to pull my boot open more, whatever, and didn't think much of it. Like his arm guy, whatever. Well,
right.
The boot on, that's problem solved. Yeah. And so, so there was that weakness in my toes, and didn't think much of it. And then started to get really, really excruciating pain across the top of my feet. just in a band, like across the top. And I thought, well, maybe it's like a fallen arch or something, and maybe the bones are just whatever. REI again, right?
Yeah.
So lived with that for a couple of weeks, and then it was to the point where I had to go to the doctor, and I got in to see her on a 1-day call or whatever, and she could tell that something was up. So went back over to the hospital, got a X-ray on my feet, and nothing. So then it was set up an appointment to get bone scans. Bone scans done, nothing. But the person that ran the bone scan said that there was a slight change in gait.
Okay.
On the left side.
Yeah.
But there was nothing else other than that. And then one day, my wife and I had to go somewhere, and I had, whatever it was, I had to pay attention. So I put my hearing aids in, and I'd already put my shoes on, and she was already out of the car. And I put my hearing aids in, and I walked to the front door, and I could hear my feet fall were different. My right foot was quiet, and my left was a flap on the floor.
Right.
And I was like, that's strange. And I stopped, and I looked down to my right foot, and I could have picked my last toes up to tap my foot. I tried to stand up on my tippy toes, and I could stand up on my right foot, but I couldn't stand up on my left foot. So I went into the car, I said, oh, that was not right. Gonna have to go back to the doctor. Went back to the doctor, and she was like, "Oh, that's not right. I think you had a stroke. You need to get to the hospital and get an MRI."
Okay.
Go get an MRI. Radiologist reads it, no issues. Again, go to problem solving. And my brother-in-law is a physio, and so I asked him, like, "What do you think about this?" And he did a workup and whatever, just at our house. And he's like, "It's neurological." He said, "You need to see a neurologist." So he was the first one to clue in to something was up. Went to the doctor and got hooked up for a series of tests with a neurologist, and had to go down to Victoria, and went down there and spent about 3 or 4 hours with him. And by the end of that appointment, he kind of summed up at the end and said, "So what do you think it is?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, because way back when, 10 years ago, the specialist said that I might start to lose feeling or sensation, or maybe even movement in my legs because of the injury to my back, pinching nerves and such." And he said, "No." I go, "Well, then I don't know." And he just spit it out and goes, "I think you got ALS. You know what ALS is?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know what ALS is." With some fundraising for the bucket challenge back a few years ago, and
Yeah.
all that. So I said, "Yeah, I know." And he goes, "That's what I think you have." But he said, "I can't independently diagnose you. You have to have a second diagnosis from a neurologist, and they have to reproduce the results of the tests that I've done." So he said, I'm pretty sure it's ALS. If I had to diagnose you, it would be ALS. Okay. And so got in the elevator on the third floor of the helicopter or the hospital, and got in the elevator, and on the way down to the bottom of the elevator ride to the main floor, I went through the 5 stages of grief and stepped out of the elevator and said, "Okay, gotta move on."
Mm-hmm.
3 months to get the second specialist appointment at the ALS clinic in Vancouver. Super good people there, and very qualified and concerned folks. And within an hour of that, the start of that appointment, the neurologist said, I concur with the results of the first one, and we don't need to carry on and do any more testing. There's a couple of nerve tests that they do with respect to how fast electrical charge travels through the nerve They measure the electrical charge and the length of time it takes to go. And it was done. It was a done deal. We know, you have ALS. Okay, what does that mean? And because it took 3 months, I had read every single piece of information that I could find anywhere. So I had a good idea of what it meant. I just didn't get the piece about the progression and the symptoms.
Yeah, you were telling me before, is there two kinds of ALS?
So there's genetic and environmental or sporadic. And so if you have this SOD1 gene mutation, then it's a genetic ALS, and basically 50%, there's a 50% chance of that gene being passed in every generation. But sporadic is the actual cause is not 100% known. And so there's a whole bunch of environmental considerations that they believe causes the ALS disease to start progressing. But they're not 100% sure. And so some of them are, inhalation of toxic smoke, significant exercise or labor for extended periods of time, that kind of physical trauma, viral infections, or dietary things that are missing from your diet. But they can't put a finger on them. But a bunch of them can stack up. So basically what ALS is that in your brain, you have upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons. The upper ones are in your brain and the lower ones are in your spinal cord. And there's a disconnect or a doubling of those motor neurons. So the input from your brain is not being transferred down into your limbs. Because either the motor neurons in your brain or the motor neurons in your lower extremity are dead, one or the other, or both. It takes a while for them to degrade, and so you see this slow degradation of whatever muscle group is being affected, and the effect is on muscles that are that can be turned on or off by your idea of movement. So anything that is not an automatic or reflex muscle, like your heart, doesn't get affected by ALS. So if it's a muscle like your hands or your legs or your feet or anything that you can decide to do.
Right. Your lungs,
you breathe, your diaphragm has to expand, but you can hold your breath. So that's not a muscle that's exempt. And same as your throat or your voice, or so you can lose the ability to swallow because those muscles or those motor neurons are affected, and it can happen in the progression. So you don't know, and this is one of the things that doctors are so frustrated with, especially the neurologists, in talking or caring for their patients, because they can't tell the patient what to expect next. It's not like a cancer where you've got X amount of months left, or they can see the growth of a tumor and so they can see that tumor moving around. Unless we tested you every day through this, electrical nerve impulse tests and whatever, they wouldn't be able to tell you. So it's frustrating. And as a person that has it, it's frustrating as well, because you don't know, kind of what goes next. And it's not a painful disease, but some of the symptoms are painful. So it doesn't hurt when your motor neurons are being degenerated. But because your muscles aren't getting the right signals, like I was in the middle of the night, I would get a cramp in my calf that was so strong. It would point my toes straight down to the floor, and I'd have to get out of bed and open the drawer on my dresser beside my bed and pull up on the dresser in order to push my heel down. Or one time I was walking down the driveway and I got a cramp in the back of my thigh, and it pushed my lower leg straight backwards. And so I had to sit down on the ground and push down on my knee at the same time using my right foot push out on my heel to straighten my leg. And then you get 2 or 3 or 4 days after that, that muscle hurts. It just incredibly sore because, you go to the gym and you work out and you rip muscles and, your arms are sore, your chest is sore, whatever. Now imagine that times 100. So that residual pain is there, but the actual disease is not painful.
Now, I think did Stephen Hawking have ALS? So how did he survive as long as he did?
Everybody is different. So the average, and depending on where you look at what research, they say from diagnosis you have 6 months to 5 years to live. Some say 2 years to 7, but every single diagnosis is different, and you just gotta deal with it as you deal with it, and everybody will be different. I think ideally, if you have ALS, the last thing you want to go is your lungs, because everybody dies from ALS because they can no longer breathe. And so, some people with ALS have to be put on a ventilator right at the very beginning because it's the muscles of their lungs.
Right.
And those folks are the ones that die the soonest, because they die of basically suffocation. Your lungs don't work, right? And so lung capacity is a real important thing for people with ALS. And if your ALS is affecting your throat and you can't swallow, they can put a feeding tube in where so you can be fed and nourished. As long as you're still breathing and whatever, you're good to go. The problem is if you have diminished lung capacity to 60% or less, then they can't do the surgery to put a feeding tube in. So sometimes people will have a feeding tube put in early because they're starting to have diminished breathing capacity in the event that their throat stops before their lungs get to the point where they can't breathe anymore. And through research, they found that military folks are twice as likely to have a diagnosis of ALS. Twice as likely from the general population.
The environmental ALS bit, right?
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Do microconcussions or concussions come into play at all?
Yeah, 100%. It's all of those concussions and, like shock waves from explosions or, banging your head when you hit the DZ and, and had a hard landing and from parachuting and all of those things. And the issue becomes trialing all of them to come up with, is this a reasonable assumption that ALS is caused by these things? In 2008, the U.S. Veterans Affairs Organization established regulation was called the presumption of service for ALS. So back in 2008, which basically means ALS has started in this veteran because of things that they did in their career or aggravated by their service. Their motor neuron function was aggravated by service. And then realized that there were so many Americans that were American servicemen and women that were getting ALS as compared to the general population. The Defense ALS Research Program started in the States, and they approved a $20 million research grant that they've been continuing to extend over the years since 2020.
How did this work that the Americans did on ALS research and their policies that they developed as a result of this research impact here in Canada? And just like to understand what your experience has been with VAC since your diagnosis.
Initially, the Americans started with recognizing ALS as a service-related injury, and the Canadian sort of side took a look at what they were doing. And it was 2013 or 2015, the Veterans Affairs Minister acknowledged that under certain conditions, ALS could be a service-related injury. And he said to the organization that the benefit of the doubt would be given to the soldier or the injured veteran, and that a program should be started with respect to putting that application of ALS as a service-related injury through the system quicker. And so they have a red flag program now that if an application for ALS as a service-related injury comes through, it's adjudicated within 10 days, which is absolutely amazing, because that adjudication releases all of the benefits that go along with ALS, home care and caregiver benefits, and medical devices and all of those things. So it's a huge relief that you're not going to be on the hook for wheelchair ramps and all of these things through renovations and such that are costly if it's in fact determined to be a service-related injury. And I don't know that they're turning down any ALS applications as not being service-related. And from my perspective, I just have to thank the folks at Veterans Affairs, and in particular, my case manager, Melissa Adams, who is just an absolute superstar. Through the whole, and right from the very beginning, when I retired, injuries or whatever, Melissa has been, by my side, and I know that there's lots of occurrences where veterans are not happy with the support they get from Veterans Affairs, and they're voicing their opinion in the news and such. I just have not had that experience at all, and it's unfortunate that it does happen. But I have to say, 100%, my case manager and all of the interactions I've had with Veterans Affairs have just been stellar. There's never been a time where I've said, those guys at Veterans Affairs are screwing me around. It just hasn't happened in my case. So amazing support from them.
I mean, I don't mean this question to be flippant at all, or a blinding flash of the obvious, but so how did this change the way you live? I mean, we already talked about, you're going to have some physical issues that you're going to deal with that you're already dealing with, but what other aspects of your life has this driven change into?
Well, I think that you take a different look at all the things you do in a day, and strive to do all the things that you can until you can't, and spend time with the folks that you really want to spend time with, and enjoy those people. And I think our days are so taken up with trying to make a living, and and all of those things that you need to do to survive as a family, and we put aside the things that are really important, like just having a chat at supper time and understanding what your kids are up to, or being able to help somebody in your community that's less fortunate than you are while you still can. Those things are important, and if you put them aside because you're angry or you're depressed or you're feeling sorry for yourself, then you're only doing yourself a disservice. And so when I said I went through the 5 stages of grief, for some people that don't know what they are, they're denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And everybody goes through them at a different rate. And maybe they hover in one of those 5 stages for longer than others. When I say I went through them all, in the elevator ride down, I meant it, because when I walked out of the elevator, I said, I need to do everything that I can while I can. And when I find out that I can't do something, I need to search for the other things that I can still do. And if I dwell on it, if I, think that how unfortunate it is, for me and whatever, then I'm just wasting time that I could be doing good things. And so I continue, like, I see people that come to our shoulder to shoulder program that are far worse off, far better off in the long run than I. But they haven't figured out yet how to get over the issue, And it's unfortunate, because I think that once they figure that out, the light comes on and the world opens up. So that's part of the shoulder to shoulder that I like, is seeing the light come on and people say, what, I'm not as bad off, pardon me, as I thought. And being able to provide the sort of the groundwork for that is super important.
Russ, this has been great. We've known each other for a while, and I'm so thankful to get you on the show to be able to share your story and raise some awareness on ALS, which is wonderful. So appreciate your time today and you being one of our Northern Sentinels.
Truly, thank you for the opportunity. It's been great to talk to you, Chris.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Russ. Please subscribe to The Greater Good on Substack to get this and other content to help you citizen better. Thanks for listening, and goodbye until next time.